Michael Horn is our speaker for this session. Michael Horn, I just talked to him. He went to Yale, he went to Harvard, but he grew up in Virginia as an ACC fan. Now, we're holding him totally responsible for the fact that Maryland, I said, hey, Virginia? I should have said Maryland.
Maryland, yep.
Yeah, Maryland. Maryland has left the ACC and gone to the Big Ten. Can you imagine that? But in any event, we wish him well. Michael, today, I think, working, of course, along with his partner, Clayton Christensen, is the man who is most on what we sometimes call the cutting edge of educational technology, e-learning, all the things that we're talking about in that regard. Now, some of us, most of us grew up not having those technologies available to us. I want to say to you that I'm having to learn about it. And many of our friends and many in the legislature are having to learn about it. Many of us come from rural areas where we don't have as many resources. And we haven't moved into this as much as some of the rest of you have. But folks, this is about personalizing learning. It is making available technologies that will help students learn more. I want to tell you a little story. One time when I was governor, I was always visiting schools. And I went to Williams High School in Burlington. I don't know if we've got anybody here from Alamance County or not, but some of you are close by. They had a young man take me on a tour of the school. I recall it so well. Young, tall, good-looking African-American young man who had just been voted all-state quarterback in the 3A conferences. He was great. He took me around. I liked him so much. I was so impressed with him. And before the end of the tour, I got him aside and I said, I hope you're going to go to NC State. He sort of hung his head and was embarrassed. He said, Governor, I'd like to go to an ACC school, but my grades aren't good enough. And I said, son, because, I could tell how dedicated he was, what a fine, dedicated person he was. I said, son, what's the problem? He said, I just need more time. What he meant was he needed more help. He needed the time to get that in school, and he wasn't getting it. And these educational technologies give us the opportunity to help young men like him learn more, help the teachers to be more effective. And by the way, these technologies are going to require even more teachers. They aren't going to replace teachers. You'll hear Michael talk about that. But I am delighted that he's here. He's the best in the country. We try to bring the best in the country to you all, and we have it in Michael Horn. Michael, delighted to have you here.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you. I'll just stand up for a couple minutes and then sit down and we'll have a conversation here. But I just want to thank Governor Hunt so much for his leadership, not just in North Carolina, but nationally, to help all students succeed. The country owes you a debt of gratitude, and I certainly appreciate it. I also want to thank all of you for being here. I think this is the third or fourth retreat that I've had the honor to be participating in here in North Carolina. It's good to be back here, see some friends here in the audience. It's good to talk with you all. What Governor said to me was, Michael, make this really tangible when you talk about it. And so what I want to do is tell you 3 stories that illustrate the problem that we have, for which this world of online learning in schools, what we call blended learning, can be such a terrific solution to help students, teachers, the schools, and the communities themselves. So I want you to walk with me into a classroom in the 5th grade where there's a boy named Jack. And Jack gets off to start at his school. He's got about an hour and a half for math every single day. And every single day, Jack falls further and further behind. He struggles to get the concepts right. He doesn't do that well in tests. He's frustrated. And Jack feels like one of those kids that just, quote, is never going to get it. You know those kids, right? Now, let's pause there for a moment, okay? Let's talk about Jack's teacher. Jack's teacher's name is Rich. Great guy, great teacher, inspiring. And he has 30 kids that he has to teach every single day. And he has to move on in the curriculum every single day. There's another topic to get through. Every 3 weeks he gives a test. He's got to move on to the next one. And he sees Jack there falling further and further behind. He sees other kids. He can see that they're struggling with different things. He sees that they have different background knowledge. They learn at different paces. But he's only got this much time with each of the students, and he's got to get through the curriculum, and he's only got so much time for each child. What's Rich supposed to do as a teacher in that classroom to figure out what's troubling Jack to unlock this? I want to tell you one more story from a very different angle, going into high school. Rural part of the country, could be in North Carolina. There's a student there. Her name is Tracy. And Tracy wants to go to a great college. She wants to be in sciences and engineering. She knows that's a ticket to a lot of great careers out there right now. But her school is like the third of schools nationwide that do not offer physics. They have no highly qualified teacher to offer physics. They have no budget to offer physics. It's at a rural part of the school, rural part, as I said, of the state. And the top colleges, whether it's ACC or otherwise, maybe in California, the University of California system, they require you to have these classes to be able to gain admission. And if you get into college without them, you're often going to go into a remedial track. And if you're in a remedial track, we know that your chances of graduating are abysmally low. So how do we solve these 3 very different problems? Let me just tell you how blended learning addresses actually every single one of these. So back to that 5th grade classroom where Jack was struggling with his teacher, Rich, and both of them were sitting there frustrated that they couldn't do more. What the teacher, Rich, discovered was this thing called Khan Academy. How many people know Khan Academy? Okay, so almost every one of you. Free online math lessons. And what he did with that hour and a half period was he said 45 minutes of that time, the students are going to be on computers, learning at their individual place, path, and pace from the Khan Academy, taking videos, doing quizzes, getting feedback. And then for the other 45 minutes, we'll work in projects where we apply what we've been learning to higher order concepts in math and to apply it into the real world. And what you found was that Khan Academy, it makes you in the very beginning go back to the beginning of math. It's kind of humbling for someone like me that thought I knew it all. But it says where, this is where you are. These are your weaknesses, your strengths. And it makes you work on it. And it turned out Jack wasn't 5th grade math he had a problem with. It was something way earlier that dated back to 2nd grade math. Manipulating 2-digit addition that he had trouble with. And he hadn't gotten that concept right, but the class was forced to move on, and his gaps in understanding only increased. But once he was able to individualize that learning and realize that's where his problem was, he spent about a week just working on that concept, and all of a sudden it got it, and he started soaring. He not only caught up with the class, he was 3rd to bottom in the class at the beginning of the year. Within 70 days, he was 4th from the top. That's blended learning. That's how powerful that is. Now, Rich, what is he doing? During the 45 minutes that those kids are working on Khan Academy, he's not sitting back lounging. He's looking at the data coming in, and he is meeting with every single student every single week for at least 10 minutes, maybe more, to talk about what's troubling you. Are there different ways we can teach this? Why are you getting stuck on this? Or just to give them encouragement. Gee, I see you're really flying through this stuff. Let's think about what else we can do. All of a sudden, he was able to tutor the students in ways he never otherwise could have because he didn't have to be delivering the one lesson plan for all kids. Just think about the power of what that opens up. That's what we're talking about here. Let me just finish with the rural student Tracy in high school who didn't have access to physics. It's actually more depressing than that. 19% of high schools nationwide, almost all in rural areas, don't even offer Algebra 2. Get your mind around that for a second, and the challenges we're talking about as a country for our students to live productive lives. In that, now you can connect to anywhere in the state, anywhere in the nation, and find a highly qualified teacher to be able to connect with that student to deliver physics. And that's what students all around the country are doing. North Carolina Virtual Public School is a resource you all have. And what I would say, and the governor wisely made this statement, that it's here to help teachers. This is so that we can connect high-quality teachers to any student regardless of where you live. Geography need not be destiny. And the schools can treat this as, hey, we offer physics now. What an amazing resource that we have to personalize learning, change the way time is used to give students time back in effect so we can bolster their learning and cause teachers to be able to spend their time with the students who need it most. So that's what I'll start with as a vision, and then I'd love to talk about it some more.
Well, now, first of all, they're bringing you your lunch. A lot of times I notice when they bring lunch and the programs disrespectful to eat. It is not here. We want you to eat that good lunch. And we do also want you to, of course, listen, and we welcome your questions. Now, Michael has given a wonderful introduction to this. I think he's made plain how important all of this is to schools everywhere, but including states that have a lot of rural districts and all kinds of schools and all kinds of students and teachers. Do any of you have questions as Michael has gotten us started? And we, of course, want the legislators to be the first ones to ask questions, but we would welcome some from our other staff too. Any questions of Michael now as he's gotten us underway in thinking about this? Okay, yes, please. I will ask you to stand up, Senator. I know who you are, but go ahead and ask the question of Michael.
Michael, Josh Stein from Wake County. How big is a problem, the lack of hardware? How do we deal with the fact that in rural counties they don't have enough computers in the classroom? So how much can you truly individualize it if there aren't enough machines for kids to look at?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's, and I'm glad you started there because there's a danger to my story that people say, well, this is just growing. What does policy have to do with it? And what I will tell you is policy has a lot to do with it to make sure that this is equitable across geographies and by income. And secondly, so that it truly captures the promise and personalizes learning and doesn't replicate the standardization online, which is a big and real danger. So to answer your question, two things. One, before the hardware first is the broadband infrastructure you need, the high-speed internet. North Carolina is a leader in that particular aspect relative to other states. Over the last really 15 years, North Carolina has put in a lot of steps to extend high-speed internet. With the modernization of E-rate that has just occurred in the last 6 months in Washington, D.C., those dollars should be a lot more accessible and to enhance connectivity not just to the school but to the individual classroom itself, which should provide a big boost. Second thing, in terms of the hardware itself, there's a few different approaches here. What we talk about in the book, Blended, is my biggest worry is that districts know that this is important, and then they just go out and buy lots of devices and ask, what do we do with it next? There have been some high-profile failures in places like Los Angeles, California, around this one-to-one initiatives. What I would encourage people to do is step back and say, what problem are we trying to solve? Really design a solution and then figure out what's the right number of devices, we need for that solution. A lot of these rotation models that I described in the beginning, like for Jack, only require a device for every 2 or 3 students, for example, because you're rotating your time on them. In some of the rural parts where you're having students take a select number of online courses, you might not need a device one-to-one for every student. And then the other thing I would say is increasingly what I think the trend will be is this. Really, the cost of devices is falling rapidly in the world right now. Google has a device for about $250, but in India, they've got one for about $80 now, I think. This is going to continue to drop, and I think that devices in the future will sort of be like, how many people remember Trapper Keepers? Yeah, okay. I think devices are going to be like the Trapper Keepers of the 1980s, sort of in the 21st century. Just most students will have them, and then the key for districts in the state will be to pay for those devices for those families that legitimately cannot afford them, which should bring the cost of this way down. And last thing I would say is I think the insight that Mooresville in North Carolina has had is that they treat these devices like an operating expense, not a capital expense. And what I mean by that right now is that in a lot of school districts, you'll see them raise a bond measure to pay for these devices. Well, you pay the bond off over 100 years or something. The devices are done in 3 years. And you're going to have to offer another one. So treating it as a recurring line item in the budget for whatever you're trying to accomplish and knowing that 3 years is probably the useful life of these things is pretty important.
Yeah. Now, North Carolina has made a lot of progress. In some ways, I think one of the reasons Michael comes here a lot is because we've done some special things. We are thrilled to have our state superintendent here today. And by the way, she's been just elected as president of the National Superintendents of All America. Let's give her a big hand, June Atkinson. June, take a minute, if you would, before we get some more questions, and just sort of update us as to how we've done in wiring our schools across the state, and whatever you would say in terms of how we're doing getting the devices. Greensboro, of course, is a national leader, Mooresville, but just kind of update us a little bit as we get into more questions here.
Okay. Thank you, Governor, for the opportunity. In North Carolina, we have connectivity to the schoolhouse door. Our challenge is to have the connectivity in each of the classrooms. Through Race to the Top dollars, we have come a long way in being able for school districts to move forward with the use of technology in a blended environment to help improve student achievement. Currently, the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction are working with the Friday Institute to develop a digital learning plan. And notice that I emphasize learning, not necessarily digital. And that report is due to us by the end of August of 2015. And that plan will lay out for us the financial needs in order to have technology everywhere to help improve student achievement. Also at the state level, through the use of Race to the Top dollars, we are the first in the nation to develop an electronic platform that has at least 5 components. And this electronic platform, called Homebase, is one where we can provide the resources, given sufficient dollars, provide resources to have blended learning, to have personalized learning. Homebase consists of the following components. 1, student information. I have to say this is a sidebar. We are going through the steps to ensure the privacy of students as mandated by legislation. So it has student information. It has curriculum materials and resources that would include some of the best teacher materials we have in North Carolina or even in the United States. It also has assessments that teachers can use at will when they want to see if a child has learned. It also has resources connected to the Khan Academy, to other online providers. Another part of that system is the whole notion of professional development resources. And currently we have over 40 modules online developed by some of the best teachers in our state to help teachers become better. It also has our evaluation system. And our goal in developing this was that the state would do this one time for 115 school districts rather than 115 school districts doing the work one time. And so we have huge economies of scale. In fact, we have estimated that we have saved the state if we did this, if each individual county did it as one of our neighboring states did, then we would have spent approximately $66 million more dollars. So we did it under budget and on time. As with any technology system, we have had some bumps in the road. We had bumps in the road with the student information system, which they have the first year. We were in our second full year. We are on top of those challenges. And then we are in our first rollout of the learning resources. So we anticipate that this system, to maintain it and to continue to add to it, would cost about $6 million to continue to further develop it and provide it for all schools in our state free of charge to them.
Okay. Representative, thank you. Representative Verla Ensko had a question. Verla?
I'm curious about
Get the mic here.
my interest is in, are we training teachers differently in our schools of education? Are we having staff development to do that? Is there resistance from teachers who've been used to the lecture approach, or that'd be helpful.
Terrific question. So in terms of teacher preparation, there's a few things that are true. One, when teachers get into these environments, they say a few things. One, holy cow, I would not go back to the old way because I knew I wasn't able to reach every student, but I was hamstrung. Now I can see. But holy cow, it's a lot more work as well. The third thing they'll say is, and this is an average statement I'm going to make, but 5% of my training trained me for what is now 95% of my job, and 95% of my training trained me for what's only 5% of my job. And schools of education are not adapting to this reality fast enough nationwide. There are some programs that are out ahead, but by and large, they have not moved as aggressively as we need to give the teachers the support in the field for this. Teachers tend to figure it out. They're smart people, but it takes them longer than it might otherwise. And I think we're going to see the rise of on-demand online professional development, much as was just alluded to, that can help skill up people a lot faster. But this is a very fast-moving place. And the last thing I would say is the skills necessary to be successful in, say, Mooresville, as opposed to, say, Charlotte, seem to be different still. We're not quite sure which ones are common and which ones are different, depending on the type of instructional model you set up. And so that's been difficult, I think, for schools of education to figure out this is the way we will now train, because it's not yet clear what's common across a curriculum, depending on where you're teaching.
By the way, there are several points in the program at this retreat that you're going to be hearing from teachers. Right after our chamber, National Chamber Vice President speaks, we're going to hear from a great teacher. We're going to hear from the Wake County Teacher of the Year tonight. Rosa Gill's going to introduce her. And this afternoon, by the way, we've got those great breakout sessions that you all have said you've enjoyed and learned from so much, in which you're going to get to listen to teachers and principals and other people talk about how we improve teaching and help make students successful. Any other questions right now? And we welcome them. Right over here. Yes, please.
Thank you, Governor. Greg Meyer from Orange and Durham counties. I have a couple questions. I'll start with one. I had the chance to read Amanda Ripley's book, The Smartest Kids in the World, and then hear her speak. And one of the things that she raised as a question was why we're being outperformed by countries who have much less technology in their schools than we have. And I think she furthered that into another question of, is technology really going to get us where we need to be, or are there other things that we need to focus on? I just wonder what your thoughts are on that question.
Yeah, so Amanda, I think, raises, it's funny, by the way, I just came out of an Eisenhower Fellowship where I was in Korea and Vietnam looking at their education systems for a couple months. So we both were in Korea as a result of that, and shared some similar impressions, I think. What's interesting is, I think Amanda raises the right question, that the mere presence of technology itself will do nothing to transform our schools. And we have, in fact, as a nation, spent over $100 billion simply putting technology into classrooms, be they smart boards or computers or whatnot, to almost no effect whatsoever. But what I think Amanda misses is that we're not talking about technology for technology's sake here. We're talking about fundamentally transforming the system from one that has rewarded the amount of time students sat in seats, regardless of how much they have learned, to one that is fundamentally concerned with each individual succeeding, and technology being the undergirding of that. And you cannot do, the best form of education in the world is one-to-one tutoring. Study after study shows that. Turns out it's prohibitively expensive. But if we harness the power of technology to bring those benefits, to amplify then each individual teacher, then we're talking about something very different. So I think Amanda's conclusions are absolutely correct, but I also think that it's the wrong question.
We got a lot of questions, but let me mention one thing that I want to make sure we cover, and that's this concept of flipping the classroom. How many of you have heard of that concept, flipping the classroom? Well, most of you have, or about half of you have. I love it. And in preparation for you all, I called my grandson in Charlotte, who has a couple of teachers or classes in which they flip the classroom. Now, one of them is in science. And he has, when he goes home in the afternoon, his teacher has prepared lessons for him, little lectures, whatever, maybe involving examples of problems and that sort of thing. Now, he can online see those lessons, and they're generally short, 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20. And at the end of watching that online, his teacher has questions. They call it a little quizette. You get it? A little quiz. And he answers those questions. The teacher knows online how he answered those questions. Did he get them right or didn't get or not? When they go back to school the next day, the students have already seen the lecture. Maybe they saw it 2 or 3 times. And sometimes we need to see it 2 or 3 times. They can then start asking questions and exploring implications of what was being taught and so forth. So it means you can spend a lot more time. That student at Williams High School in Burlington who said, I need more time, he could have had 2 or 3 times as much time if we had used this approach. Now, did I say that about correctly?
That's exactly right. I mean, I think of flipped classroom as it's a form of blended learning, and I think of it as the gateway drug to doing even bigger elements of this. It's just the ability for someone to press pause. I didn't quite get that. Rewind, watch it at slower speed, speed it up because I already got this. Mm-hmm. That's unprecedented power in the hands of students, which amplifies teaching in the classroom.
And by the way, they're very familiar with all of these technologies, much more than we are. Let me ask you all in the legislature, we've got great leaders here who've been leading education matters over so many years. My tenure goes back as long as any of you, and I know what you've done, and I thank you, and I'm proud of you. The children thank you. Have we had a commission that is laid out? I mean, I know we've done an awful lot of work with regard to having the hardware available and creating the North Carolina Virtual School and so forth under Governor Perdue. Have we had a commission that has laid out what we ought to do if we wanted to have this for all of our school systems? What would be required and what would it cost? Now, Jack Hoke is here. Jack, where are you? He heads up the Superintendent's Association in North Carolina. Get a microphone over here to Jack Hoke, if you will. Now, Jack, let's say we wanted every school system in North Carolina. 115 of them now, is that right?
That's correct, Governor.
We wanted all of them to have these opportunities. What would it take? Well, I mean, is this an appropriate thing for the legislature to say, just like we want to have teachers for every classroom?
Well,
we
it
ought
would
to have this kind of technology available?
It would be, but again, it would be a phase-in process because of the enormous cost of that. We would have to look at phasing that in over several years due to the budget. And then I think what our speaker has talked about with the FCC and the modernization, that's going to be the biggest opportunity to get the high-speed internet to our rural folks. But we still have to get all this hardware. So it would take some policymakers getting together with superintendents and other education officials to lay out what we want to do and when we want to accomplish it, to get it accomplished and start the process.
Folks, we have been delighted to have you all here for this opening session. I know there are a lot more questions we haven't gotten to yet. Michael's book, by the way, Blended, is going to be given to each of you. I don't know if he has time to sign them or not. In fact, we don't have them in here. We're going to, I think, deliver them to your rooms. We'll try to have him sign them before we take them out to your rooms. But you're going to get this. I really urge you to read it. And I really urge you to think big about what we ought to be doing in North Carolina and how we can do it. And we can do it in a way that fits each school's district needs. But for goodness sakes, don't leave us poor counties, rural counties out, and these poor areas of our cities out. North Carolina, a long time ago, decided to try to provide excellent education for every area. My friend here from Wayne County, we're next door. During the Depression, not the recession, which got close to a depression, during the Depression, North Carolina acted as a state to keep the schools open. And a lot of people didn't think we could do it. By the way, in a lot of states, they didn't do it. But we can do it. We ought to do it. It's the economically smart thing to do, and I think it's the morally right thing to do. So, we are now going to wrap this up, but first let's have a big hand for Michael Horn. We're his favorite state, I think. He's our favorite man. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.